Hello, thank you for joining us today. My name is Greg Bybee, and I lead marketing and customer experience at NovoEd. And my favorite part of the job is being able to share the innovative work that our customers and partners are doing with the NovoEd platform. Today, I'm excited to share with you and introduce to you Scott Hessel, the director of the Lundgren Center for Retailing at the University of Arizona. And today we're going to talk about a new model for retail training in executive education. So I'll kick it off with a brief introduction to NovoEd to provide some context, and we'll turn it over to Scott. So one thing we're seeing across all of our partners is really that there's a massive wave of digital transformation going on in executive education. And actually, this is across higher education, corporate learning, continuing adult education as well. Part of this is driven by a change in demographics and just a change in the modern worker today to being more digitally native, focused on mobile devices, demanding of content and learning anywhere on the go. But this is also driven by cost. Budgets have remained flat at companies for learning, and there's also a lot of travel reduction efforts going on, partly for cost and partly for environmental concerns. And adding on to this, the fact that the world is becoming much more globalized, and so companies are much more spread out, as well as having the gig economy and extended workforce, it's just become impossible to do executive education the way it used to be done. Still, for a small portion of people, they're able to fly into a great in-person program, but the vast majority of their organizations have been left unserved. And that's why more and more corporate training and executive education is beginning to move online. Another big benefit of this is becoming more agile. Organizations typically used to roll out training with a train-the-trainer model. Or executive education used to announce a training program a year in advance to try to get enrollments. And the problem is by the time the training actually hit the individuals, it had already been outdated. The case studies had changed, the companies that they had written about had already either gone bankrupt or IPO'd. And sometimes within companies, the specific training was no longer as relevant. So being able to move that online and deploy training in a matter of minutes and then update on the fly is making it much more possible to be agile and most importantly, reach the entire organization. When you're able to take great in-person training and scale it online, the entire organization can benefit from that. But what's surprising then, despite this massive push that we're seeing across all of our clients, across every conference we go to, all the industry reports, is that it's slowing down. And depending on what report you believe, somewhere between 80% and 50% of training is still left in person. That's the vast majority of training is still done offline, in person with facilitated sessions. And that's surprising to a lot of people. But if you think about it, we've already gotten through the low-hanging fruit. A lot of the compliance training, basic introductory skills, lecture-style courses, those moved online fairly quickly through computer-based training, virtual instructor-led training, and other types of online courses. But the really important type of training, leadership, executive development, industry knowledge, connecting with peers, innovation, design thinking, strategy, sales, customer service, the list goes on. These topics are still stuck offline. In fact, if you look at this data from the training industry report, it really makes that point clear. So in blue, you have mostly online, and in the kind of middle dark green, it's mixed, and then light green is mostly in person. And you can see this very clear trend that these higher order interpersonal skills are still done primarily in person, whereas compliance and IT and these kind of easier, I don't say easier topics, but more knowledge and fact-based topics have been done mostly online. So why is this, and what can we do about it? Well, first, the insight for us is really to think about what makes for great learning, especially those higher order soft skills. And it turns out it's really not lectures and traditional online courses. The way that we learn how to be a better leader is through in-person workshops. It has to be experiential. There needs to be collaboration, role play, case studies, feedback and mentorship and coaching. Someone needs to try something, fail at it, get feedback on it, and iterate from there. And so, it kind of makes sense why so little of this has scaled online, because if you look at most online courses and online executive programs in the past, they've been designed to replicate the lecture model of training. And what we really need is for an online learning platform to replicate this experiential workshop model. And that's exactly what NovoEd does. NovoEd is an online learning platform designed to replicate the experience of great in-person learning. It's easy to stay on track with to-do lists and timelines that can work with you across mobile devices so that participants, learners, students can use any device anywhere in the world to access their content and collaborate with peers. And that collaboration is really the key in what makes NovoEd so unique, is that we're able to put people into teams to work together on projects, collaborate, get feedback, iterate within a small group, but then share that work out with the entire community. And so that the course, the content of the course becomes focused more on the team's work and on individuals' work rather than necessarily any content from the instructor. And if you think about great executive education programs you've been in, great business school classes you've taken, that's what made them unique, right? There was a small amount of seed content that started a discussion, but then the discussion sort of grew organically and people began commenting on each other's work. This also really helps to improve motivation and accountability, because if you think about who you care most about, it's usually your peers. It's people in similar roles at other companies. It's your friends and colleagues at your current company. It's not necessarily a facilitator. And so NovoEd, by making this content available for the community, drives accountability. We also support a variety of feedback and mentorship models, both formative feedback and summative feedback. And in this example, you see an example of peer evaluation, being able to rate someone's work on a rubric and provide constructive feedback for how they can improve. And finally, you can't manage what you can't measure. And so because NovoEd enables a wide variety of new pedagogies and opens the doors for engagement, we've created an entire robust data analytics platform to measure and manage the engagement and the outcomes that are going on in the course. So we work with a variety of organizations that train professionals, and they really fall into two camps. The first are employee training and corporate L&D, usually within organizations. Clients there include GE, Comcast, Nestle, Sanofi, Genzyme. And the second are organizations that train others. So these are executive education firms, training firms, consulting shops, business schools. So University of Arizona, UC Berkeley Haas, Stanford GSB, IDEO, and Deloitte. But today we're really here to focus on one of those, which is the University of Arizona, and in particular, the Terry J. Lundgren Center for Retailing. And we're going to talk about how Scott Hessel, the director of the center, has been able to create a new model for executive education to train the future leaders in retail at scale. So with that, let me welcome Scott and turn it over to him.
Thank you, Greg. It's a pleasure to be here and talk a little bit about our program and what we're doing in terms of executive education. So I wanted to kind of give kind of an oversight of kind of what I'm going to talk about here. So first, I want to talk a little bit more about my background and the Lundgren Center for Retailing, what we do, and then talk a little bit about kind of put this into some context here. Talk about what's going on in retailing today and some of the challenges. Anybody who's been watching the news can see kind of a lot of things going on in the retailing industry right now, and then how that impacts then kind of training development initiatives and efforts. And then finish off talking more specifically about our kind of executive ed strategy, how NovoEd has fit into that here at the beginning and will continue to be so. And then also want to, in that, kind of highlight a specific client that we've worked with and finish off with kind of our future plans. So that's the kind of basic structure of that I wanted to talk about. All right. So as Greg said, I'm the director of the Terry J. Lundgren Center for Retailing here at the University of Arizona, and also our PetSmart professor of practice. I've been working here at the university for now, I just finished my 9th year in the director's role for a couple of years. And so I run our center, which I'll kind of detail a little bit about what we do now for almost 2 years, just a little shy of 2 years. But I've been teaching in our program for a total of 9 years. Before that, I taught at a couple other institutions, as well as been involved in some startup companies and consulting a variety of companies, and also was the chief operating officer of a medical device company, which its connection to retailing was that we did sell into the retail pharmacy channel. So, the center sits kind of separately from our retail and consumer sciences program. And that program has about 550 students, undergraduate students, who go on into buying, planning, allocation roles, store management roles, supply chain, product development, all a variety of roles within, certainly within the larger retailers, but they'll also go into smaller startup companies and a variety of other kind of companies that support the retailing industry. So one of our missions certainly is to help connect those students to industry. These pictures that I have on the slide are from our recent global retailing conference that we hold every April. We just finished our 21st year. Those who may not be familiar, Terry Lundgren just stepped down as the CEO of Macy's and is a UA alum, so he obviously has a really close connection to our university and to our center, obviously. So that's one big element, is to connect those students to those opportunities. So through internships and a lot of professional and career development activities through the center, and just exposure to executives, that's definitely kind of a key part of our mission. Then as well, and this is an area that we're growing, particularly given the fact that we are pushing into executive education, is to help develop the knowledge base within the retailing industry. And certainly we get about 350, 400 people come to our global retailing conference from throughout the retailing industry. It's a great opportunity in that measure to be able to spend a couple days, 2.5 days, really, kind of talking and listening to some really great speakers year after year. But we've wanted to try to expand that out even more so. And that's really what's led over probably about the last 1.5 to close to 2 years of really looking at executive education as an area of potential growth to impact this part of our mission. And so that's what we've been working on here for the last couple of years. So before I kind of get in and talk specifically about what we've been doing, I wanted to put some context to kind of what we're doing and why we've structured what we're doing the way we have. And that's to have some sense and understanding of where kind of retailing is today. And certainly the retail industry, the retail market is definitely in some significant disruption. A lot going on in the industry, which I'll highlight some of those things here. But this is important to understand because it really has driven kind of how we structured and why we're investing into this area in our center. So I wanted to just give a little bit of a highlight on kind of a top level highlight on some of the things that are going on in retailing. So if we look back, over a number of years, going back to right before the Great Recession, 2007, 2008, see how consumer confidence had dropped quite a bit. But since that point, consumer confidence has been steadily growing outside of one little blip there because of the Euro crisis and things going on in Greece and Spain and so forth. But other than that, consumer confidence has been increasing pretty steadily over that period of time. So, which is great news, you would think, for people wanting to go out and spend money, feeling a little bit more confident about where their personal life, personal financial position is, and their own kind of household. Think, okay, that's good news. People are going to be spending more. So we've got that piece that's really positive. Meanwhile, kind of over that same a little bit expanded timeline, that we've looked at personal savings. At least the latter half of this graph highlights what I was showing in the previous one. But you can see from 1975 was kind of a peak where personal savings rate just slowly over time decreased until essentially the same period of the Great Recession, 2007 and 8, where the personal savings rate started to go up again. People were paying off debt, people feeling a little insecure, so they wanted to put a little bit more into savings. Certainly this dropped during this period of 70s through the first part of the century. that spending and consumption and retailing certainly did grow quite a bit, but now we're seeing that personal savings rate is starting to go up, which is good in itself, but from a retail perspective does pull some monies out of consumption. If we look at kind of retail sales growth through several different decades here, you can see how from the 70s, 80s, 90s had pretty good growth. Certainly dropped a little bit, but pretty steady growth. Then after the recession and for that period of time afterwards, retail sales have been extremely low. And even looking into the future, the National Retail Federation, which is the industry's kind of major organization, it predicts it's still not going to be very strong, a little bit better than certainly over the last 5 years or over that period of time, but still not really strong growth. And so we have that challenge that retailers are struggling with. In addition, you can see how even while there is some growth, which is good for the industry, the profitability of retailers has dropped quite a bit over the years, and this is only a short segment. This kind of trend is continuing on, somewhat sporadic data after this, but that retailers are taking a smaller and smaller piece of the retail kind of profit pool, that the consumer packaged good companies, basically pretty much everything in a grocery store, everything in a Target, a Walmart, or a good share of it at least, is being taken by those companies, and a smaller profit is being able to held by the retailer themselves. So you have kind of a lot of elements going on that doesn't pretend very well for the retailer. And this has then turned into this year and last year as well, and kind of forecast for some time as well. A lot of other retailers are on the brink of being added to this list of companies that are closing down, have either gone bankrupt and are closing out entirely, or are just shuttering stores at a significant volume for a variety of reasons. So you got a lot of store closings that are announced for this year, and these numbers were strong for last year as well. And then you also see how layoffs are then occurring, obviously, with some of these companies closing down entirely. So you do see this kind of significant impact on retailing and really changing the face of retailing. Now, even in this particular slide, it does mask a little bit some good news as well, or at least kind of changing news, that there are certainly categories or certainly retailers that are opening stores that at fairly fast rates. Ross Stores, Tuesday Morning, kind of these off-price retailers are growing, as well as you see many kind of pure play online retailers that are now opening stores. Amazon certainly has started to open up stores and experimenting with that. Warby Parker, Birchbox, several other kind of historically just pure play online companies are opening stores too. So there is some growth. So it's not all bad news, but the basic kind of story from this is that traditional retailing is dying. So when I say traditional retailing, I'm talking about really big stores, a lot of them kind of in malls, kind of a common assortment across all stores, or largely common assortments, a very, very siloed engagement between kind of the online experience and a store experience, that they just very distinct from one another, not very integrated. And then historically, just a very strong reliance on all the engagement, let alone sales as well, kind of in a single channel, being the physical bricks and mortar store. What's new is a very much more personalized experience, and then a much more integrated engagement across all the platforms, store, web, mobile. So that's much more integrated and then much more personalized. Now, certainly this has been driven by some of these challenges, but certainly other things are impacting that. Technology is growing at an amazing rate within the retail area. Retail stores kind of behind the scenes have an incredible amount of technology as well as at a corporate level using, particularly when it comes to big data, using that from a technology perspective, bringing in massive amounts of structured and unstructured data that they're using to help personalize the environment, the experience, and certainly, kind of business models changing quite a bit as well. And like with Warby Parker and others, really kind of really challenging kind of legacy retailers from a startup perspective. So the impact then on training and development is that retailers need to have some new capabilities as itself. They just need to have greater insights, which is really where big data is coming in, but just kind of institutionally have a much greater capabilities and new capabilities. And then that's then pushed to employees as well, both at a corporate level and the buyer planning roles, which is kind of the core, at the corporate level, the core position, but then all the way even down into stores to have them have a better understanding kind of across the entire retail operation and not themselves be very siloed like a lot of retailers have treated their store and online experience. So with that, I kind of wanted to talk a little bit about what are the training and development challenges that retailers are confronting, and then get into talk a little bit about our strategy. So there's these three, and there certainly are others, but one area that is challenging for retailers is that there really isn't, outside of our program and probably another half dozen programs like ours across the country, there's not a really strong or very expansive kind of formalized education in retailing and retailing consumer sciences. Topics, as I write here, kind of about assortment planning. What's the right assortment to put in the store? And we're talking about tens of thousands of SKUs in a particular store, different unique products in the store. What is that right assortment? And is it by region, by store? How do you do that? Markdown optimization, when do you mark down, a price on a particular product? Store operations, those things are generally not taught in a business school, which is my background, working, going through an MBA program. So that's rarely covered. And so that makes it a little bit more challenging for retailers to be able to get employees, particularly new ones, up to speed really quickly, because they need to teach some of this before they can start putting on, really, really higher end and company specific kind of training. So there isn't a really strong kind of formalized training, at an undergraduate or even a graduate level. So that's one piece. Also, you have a workforce that's very dispersed, particularly at the store level, that are all over the country or all over the world for some retailers. Regional offices, distribution fulfillment centers as well. That just makes in-person training much more of a challenge. And so that's where we've been able, in talking to some of our clients, where online training is of great benefit to be able to reach out to people all over the country in a very cost-effective way. And then also that there are just significant changes in the industry right now. I mean, it's just, from year to year, just so much is going on. So being able to keep up on that research, that understanding is really important in an environment that is so, in many ways, very, very chaotic. So with that understanding, let me kind of go in and talk a little bit about what we're trying to do in terms of executive education in our center, and then talk to a specific example that we've been working on for now about a year and a half. So we've kind of looked at it across this kind of a very broad curriculum and broad audience to a very narrow one. And so we're starting to get into each of these four areas through our center and developing them and talking to clients. So on the far left is this open enrollment program, where we have developed a course that we are in the process of trying to try to solicit and getting some people interested in it. And I'll talk a little bit about that program here in a moment. But that's across, we're trying to make that offered to across retailers, but also to a large number of companies that support and sell into retailers, including just product vendors, but also service providers, real estate companies, logistic companies, retail tech companies. So we're having that available on kind of that broad sense where anybody can enroll, and we're going to start doing that this summer. Where we've been working most recently is in the next one, this dedicated client course, where we've developed a course for specific clients, and it's dedicated just for them. But we're basically trying to move, certain elements in and out of that course to make it a little bit customized. But it's largely a kind of a basic course that's available, and just kind of creating a little bit of customization, not a lot. But that's where we started here, and already finding a great success in that regard. Then as we move kind of more and more narrow, is trying to tailor that program even more so with some curriculum changes, definitely some timing issues for companies. And then the last one is a fully customized version, which we are talking to 3 national retailers about designing that program that would include significant online, but some in person, and then basically then creating kind of more of a hybrid course. So we're trying to develop across all of these to serve kind of the various needs that retailers have, depending on where they are, as well as I should really emphasize kind of the retail industry broadly, which do include all these other kind of support industries and companies as well. So the first one that we're really focusing on is this dedicated client course. And so I wanted to talk a little bit about that particular course. So about a year and a half ago, CBRE, which is the world's largest commercial real estate company, and has a really strong retail group in it, approached us to talk about the possibility of creating a course for their retail real estate brokers. And they have, in the Americas, they have about 450, 500 brokers, and that does include their international, I guess, non-Americas group as well, their brokers in Europe and Asia and so forth. So what we did in talking to them is really try to understand their particular challenge. And so they've approached it and kind of looking at it and saying, they wanted to be something different than just a transaction of, just understanding real estate. You want this particular space, or here's, in this market, here's 10 locations that you could pick, which one makes sense for you. We'll help you in that transaction, either buying the property or leasing the property. And they solved essentially what they were doing was a very transactional kind of interaction relationship. And they wanted to move that to be a much more consultative relationship, where they could understand and have a discussion with them and be able to help them in that process, rather than just simply, here's property, and move on to the next opportunity. They wanted their clients to kind of look to them as a consultant rather than just this transaction. So they wanted to try to create that unique position in their own market, and be able to establish that, hey, they're the go-to people to go to, and they understand, from a retailer's perspective, they understand our business, they understand our challenges, and it's not just a real estate transaction to them. So essentially then what we wanted to do is to develop that solution for them. And so we went back and forth with them a great degree, and that was to be able to create that relationship. We realized what we needed to do was to be able to give them the knowledge base that they could understand, and in many ways very uniquely in that area, what are the issues that retailers are struggling with, their strategies, their opportunities, their challenges, and then how that would impact their real estate strategies. And most of these retailers, do have a real estate department, but that's not the only thing that's impacting the decision making about where to put a particular store or a distribution fulfillment center. There's basic retail strategy elements that goes into that decision making, and that's where they said, let's put together a program so that our real estate brokers that deal with these retailers can understand that. So that's kind of the starting point for what we wanted to do. So our course development process with them took quite a bit of time. We first started out with needs assessment. So I spent about a month, maybe even a little bit longer than that, having at least a couple dozen, maybe even more than that, conversations with some of their brokers across the country, and just asking them, what do you know about retailing? And so there's a little bit kind of an oral exam. I'd ask them questions about omni-channel retailing, basic retail metrics, why do retailers behave the way they do? And just to get an understanding. And what I realized from that, and it wasn't terribly surprising to CBRE, Learning and Development Team, that they didn't really know that much about retailing at that point. There were certainly some people that knew quite a bit, and I found that in my conversations, but there was people who heard of a term, they heard what omni-channel retailing is, but they really couldn't explain it very well. So there was pretty obviously right off that there was a great need. And then with that information, we worked with CBRE to create a basic outline, which I'll share here briefly, of that program, of a program that we thought would address that particular needs and get them up to a level where they could be really conversant with their clients. And then we spent 4 to 5 months putting together the program, which was really a lot of current research. So we, went through that process of identifying that current research, and then we put together about 90 video lectures that went over about 15 to 16 hours of viewing time, and some of that was product or lectures that we collected and we did ourselves. Others that we got from outside of our center and our faculty. And then we certainly, as Greg was talking about, we also put in there a lot of engagement opportunities as well. So a lot of discussions, going into stores to apply some of the things that they would have learned in the modules, different modules, so that they could apply that, and then different assignments at the end of each module where people spoke and talked to one another and gave comments to each other about their different projects and the discussion. So it was a very interactive kind of development process that then came on to the actual program itself. So what we did is created this retail insight class. It's called Basics of Retail Management. Really split it into 2 halves, kind of operational capabilities. So how do you organize through your supply chain? How is technology being used in a store? Looking at store personnel, particularly store personnel, what skills they had. So really kind of looking at the operations of the company, and then also understanding kind of the consumer-facing side of the business. Where do customers shop? Where do they want to shop? Why do they want to shop there? What products do they want? Do they want services? Do they even want experiences? How do they want to engage retailers? Do they want to use their mobile phone, use their smartphone? Do they want to be online? Do they even want to continue calling people, chatting with them online? Chat bots now are becoming a much more common thing on retail websites as well. And it's just, what does that experience mean for retailers and for their customers? So we really had kind of these 2 major sections, and each one of those sections had 4 separate modules. And each of those modules lasted for about 2 weeks for each for the CBRE people, participants. And in that were a lot of discussions and a lot of engagement. So this is kind of the basic. I want to just highlight a few of the elements in here. So each of those 8 modules had this kind of introduction where we kind of set the stage. This is what we're going to be talking about. Then each module had a lot of detail where we put in the lectures. You see the module engagement, this last kind of screenshot here at the bottom where there were discussions. So we would prompt them based on the content, talk about the specific kind of ideas in there and engaging them, talking about their own experience, as well as what they may observe in a store. So there was a lot of detail opportunities there for them to get into some materials really deeply, but then to share that with one another. And though I don't have this, I had mentioned, then we also had them do assignments and worked as a group as well. Kind of at the end of it, they did a big group project together. So there was a lot of engagement that we wanted to have through this to get them to start thinking about it, because everybody kind of has obviously a retail experience, but we wanted to really think about it in light of these kind of more, kind of academic or theoretical kind of perspective as well. So we, as I said, we kind of worked with CBRE, and the result from that, over that about 17-week period, we actually had a spring break in the middle of the 2 big modules. was that they had 80 executives go all the way through it, and it was, their feedback that they got was great. They really enjoyed the experience. It was very rigorous. We had an article about it that I wanted to just highlight here. And we're going to be starting it up again in about 2.5, 3 weeks or so. And because of the discussion among the brokers themselves, they, shared it with their colleagues in Europe and Asia. So now we actually, though it's being sponsored by the Americas group, they're bringing in people from Japan, from China, Hong Kong, throughout Europe to participate in it as well. So it's got a lot of positive responses from within the company, and that's been very positive and beneficial, as we grow this business or grow this kind of initiative within our company as well, within our center. So that is the first course of what we're putting together as an executive management certificate. So the other two are then one on retail trends, which will focus on kind of the top trends dominating the retail landscape, and also one on retail analytics, which is just basically trying to give them an understanding, or give the participant an understanding of how do retailers look at themselves, and then how do they use that information to make kind of strategic and tactical decisions. So these will be 3 courses that we're putting together that CBRE is interested in doing over a period of multiple years that will lead to this executive management certificate in retailing. Then kind of lastly, our future plans when it comes to executive education. We are, as I mentioned, kind of in this process of developing this executive management certificate in retailing. We are going to be focusing more and more on scheduling open enrollment courses, particularly because of a lot of the press that came after we did this first round with CBRE. We started getting a lot of phone calls, a lot of interest from other real estate development companies, some more boutique firms in specific parts of the country that said, hey, I'd like to do that too. So we've actually received a lot of interest as a result of that particular course. And so we're going to be, as I'd mentioned, we're going to be having our first one scheduled this summer. And then this beginning of this year, we hired a new associate director who's is focused on just executive education. And over the course of the last 2 or 3 months, we've been starting to hold a variety of conversations with top retailers and other service providers about creating a more customized opportunity for them too. So that's something that we're going to be working on, and certainly online will be a really big part of that. Again, back to the fact that these people are dispersed all over the country. And so those are kind of our future plans within our executive education efforts. So that's what we're doing at the Lundgren Center. And at this point, if there's any questions, I'm happy to answer them.
Great. Well, thank you so much, Scott. We'll give people just a second here if they have any questions. One question I had, actually, hearing you talk about some of the assignments and team projects, and I don't know how much you can share, how much is confidential, but can you give any examples of those projects, or what the participants did together?
Yeah, sure. Well, as I said, we had at the end of each of those 8 modules, we had each participant, do an assignment. So we would have something on customer engagement, customer behavior, and then we'd ask them to go and do something. Most of them involved going into the store and kind of looking at what was happening in the store in that light. So one area that, if I can recall, one type of project that we had them work on was simply go in and look at how product is displayed, because there is a lot of science behind how product is actually displayed in the store. So we'd say, go into the store and look at it and watch how people are engaging products. So there was a lot of kind of acting as a mystery shopper in a sense. So go in and watch how other people are actually engaging the store, and see are they stopping at specific displays, how are they kind of flowing through a specific department, and watch that for a half an hour, and then with that information kind of relate that back to some of the theory about how and why someone moves and engages a particular product a particular way. Is it color? Is the product folded a certain way? Is there is there certain facings? How a box on a shelf is particularly presented, colors, and so forth. And so that got them just kind of thinking about retailing in a way that they normally wouldn't look at it. And from a real estate perspective, that's important to understand. Where are doors? How many doors are there? And retailers have specific desires about how many doors are in their store and where they're located. And so that just got them start thinking about retailing in a different way.
That's great. Thank you. I mean, one thing I always advocate, sort of one of the biggest advantages of an online type program is if this was a 1 day or even a 1 week intensive workshop, it's hard for people to go out into the field, if you will, to actually go into retail stores and spend this time mystery shopping. But when you can spread it out over a period of time and do it online, it really enables a different type of project. So we've got a couple questions coming in, one from David and one from, is it Nelena? And let's do Nelena's first because it follows up on the project question. The question is, how will you evaluate individual assignments through NovoEd? Is it easier than in-person offline assignment management?
Right. Yeah. Now, with this particular, with CBR in particular, the assessment really was kind of, rather than, because I teach in our academic program as well, and I teach online in our academic program too, rather than necessarily assessing it, it was more kind of the conversation between the participants. So I built into, for each of the assignments that they, kind of in the module assignments that they had to do, I would say, okay, after you upload yours, I want you to go in and comment on a certain number of, other projects. So go in and look at them, comment what you found interesting, new take on what you had seen yourself, and create as a part of that just kind of that discussion. And most people would go in and do that, and it did actually generate a discussion. So it wasn't like, okay, you get a 90 and you get an 80 and you get a 70%, for that particular project. But the assessment really was kind of other people, other participants. Now, I certainly went in and made my own comments about a particular kind of, they all would upload a 3 or 4 slide PowerPoint with some images and their text and so forth. So I would go in and comment on them. And then we also had, which I should have noted as well, we did have some mentors in the program as well. So we had, I want to say we had 5 or 6 people from our board, which were retailers, that were also involved in the platform as well. And so they would go in and also comment, and they were spread across various different kind of retail segments. So they would talk specifically if they were in home improvement or apparel, they could talk about those as well. So it was less about kind of a grading perspective as much as kind of each other assessing one another. And I found that was very useful because it just started to get more and more engagement and more discussion.
Great, thanks, Scott. And one other thing I'd add, and Nelena, sorry if I'm pronouncing your name wrong, the platform does support kind of a wide range of assessments. So I think what Scott's team is doing is really one of the best practices, which is to make it less about assessment and more about feedback, more about sharing suggestions, having people comment and spark discussion. But we do support a wide range of sort of rubric-based grading and formal and informal type grading. So we have peer evaluation where you can set a rubric and distribute among the course and have people evaluate 5 different assignments. And there's a variety of sort of algorithms that we use to take out the highest and lowest, if you will, and remove outliers. And based on the reviews of some people can weight those more or less. So there's a lot of interesting science and assessments behind the scenes. And we also support a wide range of third-party assessment tools and integrations into tools like Qualtrics. So there's lots there, but what Scott's team is doing is really what we recommend, which is get people discussing, like use those projects as the seed for additional learning. So Scott, David has a question. What is the length and weeks of your courses, and how many hours a week do you estimate it takes to participate?
Yeah. So what we've done with CBRE, and I think, and we've already talked, we're also offering this to PetSmart as well. The same course, a little bit different for them, is that we've set it up for 2 weeks. So they get, each module gets opened up on a Sunday, and then they have 2 weeks to kind of go through all the material as well as work on their assignment and have that uploaded, within the following or 2 weeks later on that Saturday. And so that gives them a couple weekends or a good part of a couple weekends to kind of go through the material. And so we have found that works pretty well. In our first discussions with CBRE, they were thinking, should we make each module a month? And I knew that was going to be just way too long. It wouldn't feel like they were really going through something. They needed a little bit of push, a little bit of intensity. 1 week was definitely going to be, from their perspective, too fast. So 2 weeks was good. I think in the combination of watching all the videos, doing some readings that we uploaded in each module as well. Some of them had quizzes. Some of the modules would have quizzes as well, just to kind of keep track of are you paying attention and looking into it? So all of that, and then doing the assignment. Each module probably required, I'd say, probably 4 to 5 hours to complete. Just depends on how much effort they might have put into the project themselves. So probably 5 hours is probably the maximum I would think. So again, 2.5 hours per week, which most of these guys are wanting to be out in the field selling. And so that was asking a lot of them, but the result was that, they seemed to go through it and do a fairly good job. One thing that I did want to add to that is that I did share at the end of each module what the results were by participant to CBRE's learning development team. So they would know what % of the videos they were looking at. Were they taking the quiz? Were they submitting the assignments? And they used that to kind of nudge internally, people to, hey, pick it up, keep going. That's not something that I did. They wanted to control that kind of conversation, but there is that tool to be able to, let a client, in our case, let a client know, or you could let a student know, more directly, kind of where they are, and to try to urge them to keep up the pace. But that 2 week, I think, is a good amount for our particular course.
And Scott, how many of these modules are there in a course? Is it just one module, or are there multiple modules?
There's 2 kind of big macro modules, okay? So the operation focused and a consumer focused module, and then within super module, I guess I should say. Then within each one of them, there's 4 other modules. So there was kind of 8 modules all total. And then we had a spring break, even though it was in October, we had a spring break kind of in the middle of those 8 modules, where we gave them a week and a half, I think, to kind of just decompress a little bit and go do other things. Then they came back, and at the end of it, then we had a big project that they did as a group, and that was basically replicating the whole thing, but on one retailer, and they worked on it together as a group.
Great, thanks. And there's another question from Melina on the cost structure for running executive ed programs on NovoEd, on whether a startup can do that. Melina, I will actually follow up with you directly, because I'd love to tell you more and answer any questions. But the short story at a very high level is it's licensed on a kind of enterprise SaaS basis. So it's based roughly on the number of people will be in the program. There's an annual licensing fee to use the platform, and then the rest is sort of, everything's included, and you're able to run with it. So it makes it pretty easy to get running. You don't have to worry about a sort of complex cost structure. So I'll follow up with you directly. I would love to tell you more and find more about your executive education program. So any other questions? We'll give it a second or two here in case there's any other questions that come in. Great. Well, I think that's all. If you have any other questions, feel free to shoot us a note. We'll also follow up via email with a copy of the recording, and you can reply to that with any other questions, and we're happy to put you in touch with Scott or myself or anyone else on the team. So Scott, thank you so much for sharing. It's a fantastic program. And thanks everyone for joining.